Today we are diving into an idea that is, without a doubt, a cornerstone of economics and international trade law, the theory of comparative advantage. Now, it's been called the single most beautiful result in the entire field, and it really is the key to unlocking the puzzle of why countries trade with each other in the first place.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at why economists get so darn excited about this idea. Then, we'll dig into the classic example, the one with wine and cloth, that started this whole revolution. After that, we'll uncover the invisible engine that makes it all work automatically. We'll see how the theory got a modern facelift, and finally, we'll tie it all together to see why it's still the absolute bedrock of global trade today.
All right, so let's start with the big question. Why all the fuss? Why does this one theory get such a remarkable reputation? I mean, when you have leading economists calling something the deepest and most beautiful result in their entire field, you know you're dealing with something special. The Nobel Prize winner Paul Samuelson even said it's the only concept in social sciences that is both true and not obvious. And he's right. At first glance, it feels a little counterintuitive, but once it clicks, it totally reshapes how you see the world economy.
The man we have to thank for laying this all out so clearly is the economist David Ricardo. Back in 1817, he wanted to prove, once and for all, that free trade was a win-win for every country involved, and comparative advantage was his knockout punch.
And he proved his point using this brilliant, incredibly simple example. It just involves two countries, England and Portugal, and two goods, cloth and wine. The real genius here is that it all comes down to just four magic numbers that flip our whole intuition about trade on its head.
Okay, so take a look at these numbers. To make cloth, England needs 100 workers, while Portugal only needs 90. For wine, the gap is even bigger, 120 workers in England versus just 80 in Portugal. So wait a minute, Portugal is better at making everything. They have what we call an absolute advantage in both goods. Common sense would tell you there's absolutely no reason for them to trade, right? Why would the champion bother trading with the amateur? Well, Ricardo's genius was showing us that common sense conclusion is totally, completely wrong.
And here's the crucial twist. Ricardo said, forget about absolute advantage. That was Adam Smith's idea. The real game isn't about who's the best overall. It's about the opportunity cost of production inside each country. In other words, what do you have to give up making in order to make something else? That's the question that changes everything.
So let's actually look at those trade-offs. In England, to get the labor to make 1 unit of cloth, they have to give up the chance to make about 0.83 units of wine. Okay, now look at Portugal. For them to make that same unit of cloth, they have to give up making more than a full unit of wine, 1.125 units to be exact. And there it is. Because England gives up less wine to make cloth, we say it has the lower opportunity cost. This is the big aha moment. England has the comparative advantage in cloth, not because it's more efficient, but because it's less inefficient at it compared to how it makes wine.
And just like that, the path forward is crystal clear. The logic is undeniable. England should go all in on making cloth. And Portugal, it should specialize in wine, the thing it's most best at.
And here's where the magic really happens. When they specialize in trade, England gets wine by trading away cloth that only costs them 100 workers instead of spending 120 workers to make the wine themselves. They save 20 workers. And Portugal gets cloth by trading wine that costs them 80 workers, not the 90 it would have taken to make it at home. It's a total win-win. Both countries get goods for cheaper than they could possibly make them, which frees up labor and ultimately makes both nations wealthier.
But you might be wondering, okay, that makes sense on paper, but how does this specialization actually happen in the real world? I mean, it's not like a world government tells England to make cloth. Well, Ricardo had an answer for that too, building on an idea from the philosopher David Hume. It turns out this whole thing happens automatically.
It's driven by something with a bit of a fancy name, the price-specie flow mechanism. But don't let the name scare you. It's really just a way of describing an automatic rebalancing act. Back then, money was gold, or specie, and when trade got out of balance, gold would physically move from one country to the other, and that flow of money would magically adjust prices until trade balanced out again.
Let's walk through it. So at the very beginning, everybody in England is buying Portuguese goods because, hey, they're cheaper. This means a river of gold starts flowing from England to Portugal. Now, think about supply and demand. As England loses gold, there's less money chasing the same amount of goods, so prices and wages start to fall. The opposite happens in Portugal. The flood of new gold makes their prices and wages go up. And this keeps happening until eventually you hit a tipping point. English cloth becomes so cheap that it's now absolutely cheaper than Portuguese cloth on the world market. Just like that, England starts exporting cloth. Portugal continues exporting wine, and the trade balances. The hidden comparative advantage has now become a very real price advantage.
Now, of course, a revolutionary idea like this doesn't just sit on a shelf for 200 years. It gets debated, refined, and modernized, especially with some really cool visual tools that make the concept even clearer.
Modern economics loves to show this using something called the Production Possibility Frontier, or PPF. You can think of this line as a country's maximum speed limit for production. If there's no trade, a state called autarky, a country's stuck. It can only consume whatever it can make, so its people are trapped on or inside this line. That's the best they can do.
But watch what happens when we open the doors to trade. It's incredible. By specializing and trading based on comparative advantage, both countries can now consume at a point outside their own production frontier. I mean, look at that. They are literally consuming more goods and services than they could possibly produce on their own. This jump represents a massive increase in national wealth and well-being. It's the gains from trade, right there in a picture.
So, later economists took Ricardo's core idea and built on it, creating what we now call the standard trade model. The biggest change is the source of the advantage. For Ricardo, it was all about labor productivity. The modern model says it's about a country's factor endowments. Basically, what stuff a country has a lot of. Is it rich in capital, like factories and technology, or is it rich in labor? This newer model is also a bit more realistic, suggesting countries usually only specialize partially, not completely.
And the main takeaway from this modern model is super intuitive. You export what you're built to export. If a country has a ton of capital, it's going to have a comparative advantage in things that need a lot of capital, like high-tech machinery. A country with a massive population will likely export labor-intensive goods. But this simple idea leads to a mind-bending prediction called the factor price equalization theorem, that over time, free trade should actually cause wages for the same job and profits on capital to get closer and closer all over the world.
So, after this whole journey, what's the bottom line? After 2 centuries of development, why is this theory still taught as lesson number 1 in any international trade or law course?
Because the fundamental truth is just as powerful today as it was in 1817. The foundation for good, mutually beneficial trade isn't about being the absolute best. It's all about relative efficiency and opportunity cost. And this beautiful, simple principle is what gives every single country a seat at the global economic table.
The economist Anwar Shaikh put it perfectly. He said the theory of comparative advantage humbles the mighty and raises the weak. Think about that. It proves that even a country that isn't the most productive at anything can still gain and gain big from free trade, just by focusing on what it does least badly. It's a truly democratizing idea.
And that brings us to our final, really critical question, especially for anyone studying international trade law. If the economic theory is so clear that free trade creates overall gains for everyone involved, why is the real world so messy? Why are the legal frameworks for trade, like everything at the WTO, so fiercely debated and fought over, sometimes for decades? Well, that's where the elegant world of economic theory crashes into the complicated reality of politics, domestic interests, and the law.
And that's our look at the theory of comparative advantage.